Chapter 1. The Unexpected Rescue. The galaxy was vast. To most beings, its magnitude was incomprehensible, a thing of both awe and terror. But for Zarin, an elder of the Mar-Phi people, it was a reality that he had lived with for centuries. His people, telepathic and wise, had seen the rise and fall of empires, the evolution of countless species, and the disintegration of civilizations. They had reached the peaks of intellectual achievement and had known the depths of despair. Zarin had once been the ruler of his people, the patriarch of a proud and noble race. His daughter, Lyra, had been the heir to that lineage, a warrior queen who was destined to carry the flame of their ancient culture into the future. But the future had not come for her. The war had taken everything from her: the ability to walk, to run, to fight. She had been left paralyzed, a prisoner within her own body, and the greatest warrior of their age was now trapped in a state of perpetual silence and stillness, lying in a bed on their home planet, unable to fulfill the destiny that had once been promised to her. Zarin's heart ached for his daughter. The great Mar-Phi had always been a people who thrived on strength and action, a race that commanded respect with their thoughts, their words, and their presence. They did not know weakness. They did not know what it was like to be dependent on others, to be bound by the limitations of the flesh. Zarin had watched Lyra grow from a child of boundless energy to a young woman of unstoppable will. She had been fierce, proud, and filled with the kind of fire that could burn through entire worlds. But after the attack on their homeworld, after the explosion that had shattered her spine, she had become a shadow of her former self. No amount of Mar-Phi healing could help her. Their greatest healers had tried everything: medicines, energy treatments, and even the ancient techniques that had once healed their greatest warriors. But nothing had worked. The technology of the Mar-Phi could fix wounds, mend broken bones, but they could not repair the damage to Lyra's body. The war had left her a shell of the warrior she had been, and Zarin's heart was heavy with the weight of watching his daughter's spirit slowly fade away. Desperation had led him to the decision that would change everything. Zarin had always been a man of logic, of reason, and of thought. His people communicated with their minds, not with words, and the idea of seeking help from another species, especially one as primitive as humans, had seemed absurd to him at first. But what choice did he have? The Mar-Phi had their own healing techniques, their own advanced science, but there were limits to what even their wisdom could do. Zarin knew that no matter how much he loved Lyra, no matter how much he wanted to see her whole again, there was nothing left for him on Marva. Their healers were at a standstill. But the humans, they had stories. They had tales of miracles, of medics who could cure diseases that others had deemed incurable. Zarin had heard the whispers, heard the stories of a human doctor, a medic named Dr. Elias Carter, who had done the impossible. A healer who had saved the lives of entire alien species, who had brought the dead back to life, who had performed surgeries that had been beyond the capacity of even the most advanced technology. The name of Dr. Carter had spread like wildfire across the galaxy, carried on the breath of countless species, from the furthest reaches of the known worlds to the deepest shadows of space. With no other option left, Zarin had made the decision to seek out this human healer, to bring Lyra to Earth, to a place where miracles still seemed possible. And so, with Lyra by his side, Zarin had left Marva behind, taking the first steps into a galaxy far beyond what his people had ever imagined. The journey to Earth had been long and dangerous. Zarin's ship, an ancient vessel built by his people for interstellar travel, had been pushed to its limits as it soared through the stars. Lyra, weak from the journey, had barely spoken a word. Her once vibrant eyes had been dulled by the constant pain and frustration of her condition, and her silence had become a constant companion to Zarin's own. He could not blame her. What hope was there for a young woman who had lost the ability to do the one thing she loved most: fighting? To be bound to a bed, to rely on others for every basic need, was a fate worse than death for someone like Lyra. But still, Zarin pressed on. He had no other choice. The galaxy had given him no other path to follow. Earth was their last hope. When they finally arrived, Zarin was struck by the vast difference between Earth and Marva. The planet was lush, teeming with life, but it was chaotic, messy, everything that the Mar-Phi had never been. The humans were a young species, still learning, still struggling to reach their full potential. They had barely begun to explore space, yet here they were, offering the very hope that Zarin had sought for so long. He felt like an outsider, a stranger in a world that was far too foreign for him to comprehend. Yet, he pressed on, seeking the one human who had earned the galaxy's trust. Dr. Elias Carter was a man of reputation, a healer who had earned accolades and respect from beings of all species, a man whose name was spoken with reverence and awe. Zarin had no illusions about the difficulty of what he was asking. He was asking a human to perform a miracle, to cure a condition that had been deemed incurable by every alien race, every healer, and every scholar. But he had no choice. His daughter's life was at stake. When Zarin and Lyra finally met Dr. Carter, the human's demeanor was calm, almost detached. He was no stranger to alien species. His work had taken him to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, to planets teeming with life forms unlike anything Zarin had ever seen. But when Dr. Carter looked at Lyra, Zarin could see the same understanding in his eyes that he had seen in the eyes of the greatest healers of his own people. Dr. Carter did not view her as just another patient. He saw a person, someone who had suffered and needed help, someone who had a future still to be written. The conversation between them had been brief but profound. Dr. Carter had examined Lyra with a calm and practiced air, taking scans and measurements of her condition. Zarin had stood by, watching every movement, every action with the intensity of a father who had long since given up hope. But Dr. Carter's words had been a beacon of light in the darkness. "I think I can help her," Dr. Carter had said, his voice steady and assured. "This kind of injury is rare, but I've seen similar cases before. It won't be easy. There will be risks. But I'll do everything I can." Zarin had felt his heart swell with hope. For the first time in what seemed like forever, he felt the weight of his decision lifting from his shoulders. Lyra was not lost. Not yet. But what came next was the hardest part. Dr. Carter had looked at Zarin, his gaze hardening with the realization of what he was asking. "There will be a cost," Dr. Carter had said, his voice carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore. "This kind of surgery is expensive. It will take time, resources, and I'll need your full cooperation." Zarin had nodded, his mind already processing the implications. He would give everything for his daughter's recovery. There was nothing too costly. But then Dr. Carter had added something that would change everything. "I need more than just your cooperation," Dr. Carter had said, his voice now softer but no less direct. "If you want me to help her, you will need to offer something in return. If you are willing, I ask for a personal gift." Zarin had been confused, his mind racing. What could this human ask of him that he had not already given? Dr. Carter had leaned forward, meeting his gaze with a level of seriousness that Zarin could not ignore. "I need something that will ensure your trust in me," he had said. "I need her. I need Lyra, for my own purpose. I can't heal her without your full commitment. She will become my partner in this. I will help her, but in exchange, you will give me her loyalty, her service, her freedom." Zarin had stared at the human, shock and disbelief filling him. The cost of Lyra's recovery was not just money, not just time, it was her autonomy, her freedom. The idea was unimaginable to Zarin. How could he trade his daughter for this human's benefit? But he had nothing else. He had no other choice. The universe had presented him with no other path. And so, he had agreed. "You may have her," Zarin had said, his voice cold, his heart heavy. "But only if she is healed. Only if you restore her." And so, the pact had been made. Dr. Carter had promised to restore Lyra, to give her back the life she had lost. And in return, Zarin had given her to him body and soul. It was a decision that would haunt him forever, a decision that he had made out of love and desperation. Zarin stood in the quiet medical room, his back straight, his hands clasped behind him, as he watched Dr. Carter prepare for the surgery. His heart felt heavy in his chest. The weight of his decision was starting to settle in, its consequences slowly becoming clear. He had given up his daughter's autonomy in exchange for her life. Her freedom in the eyes of Dr. Carter would now be at the mercy of this human. But Zarin had no other choice. As a father, he had to make the hardest decision of his life, knowing full well that the person who had been his everything, the person who carried the hope of their future, would never be the same again. For a moment, he thought about the old world, the world where Lyra had been whole, running and playing as a child, leading the young warriors of Marva with boundless energy and fierce determination. She had been a shining light in his life, a future he had dreamed of for his people, a warrior who would bring their strength and knowledge to the stars. But that future was gone now, shattered by the violent explosions of war. Zaren's thoughts were interrupted by the soft click of the door behind him, and he turned to see Dr. Carter approaching. The human's expression was a mix of determination and quiet seriousness. "I've prepared everything. It will be a long surgery, and there are risks," Dr. Carter said, his eyes flicking to Lyra, who was resting on the table, her body still and unmoving. Zaren could feel her pain from across the room, even though they were not communicating telepathically. Her eyes, once full of fire, now seemed dull, resigned to her fate. But there was still hope. Dr. Carter's words rang in Zaren's ears. There was a chance for Lyra to regain her mobility, her strength, the things that had once defined her. "She trusts you?" Zaren asked, his voice low, a tinge of uncertainty still lingering in his tone. The thought of handing his daughter over to a human, a species so young and untested in the ways of advanced medicine, made him uneasy. He had witnessed their medical advancements from a distance, of course, but trust? That was something else entirely. Dr. Carter nodded. "She may not show it yet, but she trusts the process. I will heal her, Zaren. I promise. Just let me do my work." Zaren didn't respond immediately, his thoughts swirling with conflicting emotions. He had seen his daughter endure far too much, had watched her struggle against her body, against the chains of her paralysis. If there was even a small chance that Dr. Carter could restore her, then he had to let go. It was the only choice left. He nodded once, his expression a mix of acceptance and grief. Dr. Carter's hands moved deftly as he prepared the surgical tools, the instruments gleaming in the dim light of the room. The technology was advanced, far beyond what Zaren had ever seen, and yet, in the quiet of the sterile room, it all seemed so fragile. He turned away, unable to watch the procedure unfold. He couldn't bear to see his daughter in a state of vulnerability, knowing that the cost of her healing would be her very freedom. "You've given her to me," Dr. Carter said, his voice firm, as though reading Zaren's thoughts. "But remember, this is more than just physical healing. I will need her help, her willingness, as we move forward. If she is to be whole again, she must trust me completely." Zaren looked back at the table, his gaze falling on Lyra's still form. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. The weight of the situation pressed heavily upon him, but for Lyra's sake, he would do whatever it took. Chapter 2. The Healing Begins. The surgery was long and intense, lasting hours as Dr. Carter worked tirelessly to repair the damage that had been done to Lyra's spine. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of medical equipment and the occasional rustle of Dr. Carter's movements as he adjusted instruments and monitored the progress. Zaren stood at the far end of the room, his eyes fixed on Lyra's motionless body. He could feel her presence, her silent thoughts echoing in his mind, though the distance between them was tangible. She was still with him, even in this state, and Zaren could feel her anxiety and fear. But she had trusted him, and in return, he had trusted Dr. Carter. The procedure was delicate, as Dr. Carter had explained, and Zaren had no doubt that the human medic was doing everything he could to help his daughter. The Marfi were a proud people, not used to relying on others, but Zaren had humbled himself. He had placed his faith in Dr. Carter's hands, and now there was nothing left to do but wait. Lyra had never been one to show weakness. Even as a child, she had fought against the constraints of her body, determined to overcome every obstacle placed before her. And yet, here she was, unable to move, unable to fight. Zaren's heart ached as he watched the steady rise and fall of her chest. He had given so much for her, and yet, he felt powerless in this moment, unable to do anything more than stand at the sidelines and watch as another person worked to restore what had been taken from her. But there was a strange sense of peace in the waiting. The minutes stretched into hours, but Zaren no longer felt the crushing weight of uncertainty. There was something about Dr. Carter's calm presence, the way he moved with purpose, that put Zaren at ease. He had made the right choice, no matter how much it had cost. At last, Dr. Carter stepped back from the surgical table, wiping sweat from his brow as he let out a deep breath. "It's done," he said, his voice steady but weary. "We've done everything we can. The next few days will be critical." But the procedure was a success. "She's stable." Zaren stepped forward, his heart racing as he approached his daughter's side. She looked peaceful, but there was a fragility to her now that hadn't been there before. Her chest rose and fell with each breath, but there was no movement beyond that. Her legs remained still, and the sight of them, their unnatural immobility, sent a pang of sorrow through Zaren's heart. She was not whole yet. There was still much to be done. Dr. Carter placed a hand on Zaren's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance. "She'll need time," he said. "The healing process will be slow, but I'll be here every step of the way." Zaren nodded, his eyes never leaving Lyra. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope. There was a chance now, a real chance that his daughter could walk again, that she could return to the life she had once dreamed of, a life that had been stolen from her by the ravages of war. But even as hope blossomed in his chest, Zaren couldn't ignore the cost. Lyra's recovery wasn't just about physical healing. There would be a price to pay, a price that Zaren could not predict, but one that he would have to accept. He had already given her to Dr. Carter. He had already promised her freedom, even if it meant losing the last piece of control he had over his daughter's life. "What's next?" Zaren asked, his voice low as he turned to Dr. Carter. Dr. Carter's expression softened, and for the first time, Zaren saw something more than just the professional medic before him. There was empathy in his eyes, a deep understanding of the gravity of the situation. "Next," Dr. Carter said quietly, "we give her time, and we give her a choice." Zaren felt his heart tighten at the last word. A choice. He had given his daughter to this human medic, but the truth was, Lyra would have to make her own decisions. She would have to choose whether or not to fight for her freedom. And once she did, once she stepped into her own power again, there would be no turning back. "Let's hope she makes the right choice," Zaren said, his voice heavy with the weight of everything that had led them to this point. Dr. Carter nodded, but there was no easy answer to that question. There was only time, and the hope that Lyra would be strong enough to reclaim her life. Days passed in a blur of sterile white rooms and the soft beeping of medical equipment. The first few nights had been the hardest, not just for Zaren, but for Lyra as well. Every hour seemed like an eternity, every second weighed down by the uncertainty of whether or not the surgery had worked. Zaren had stayed by her side, watching as Dr. Carter worked tirelessly to ensure Lyra's recovery. There were moments when Zaren felt as though he might break under the pressure, his daughter's pain, her silent frustration, the uncertainty of whether or not she would ever walk again. The Marfi were a people of logic and reason, but here, on this human-dominated world, they had to rely on something much more fragile: faith. Lyra, for her part, remained as stoic as ever. She had always been a woman of few words, even before her injury. Now, the silence between them had grown into a heavy presence, something palpable that both father and daughter struggled to navigate. But there was something else in the air, something that Zaren couldn't quite place. Despite the pain and the uncertainty, he could feel the subtle change in his daughter. The small flickers of movement in her fingers, the way she began to shift her legs ever so slightly. It was a sign that the healing was working, even if the changes were almost imperceptible. For the first time since the injury, Zaren dared to hope that this journey, this sacrifice, had not been in vain. Dr. Carter had told him that the first steps of recovery would be the hardest, but they were necessary. Healing is a slow process, the doctor had explained to Zaren during one of their private conversations. Her body is going to resist, but we'll take it slow, we'll build up strength, and eventually, we'll try her legs. He had said this with such certainty, such confidence, that Zaren had believed him. But it wasn't just the physical healing that Zaren worried about. It was the emotional toll this would take on Lyra. The woman who had once led warriors in battle was now reliant on the very hands of the human who had promised to restore her. Zaren knew better than anyone that the mind was just as fragile as the body. Lyra had always been a fighter, but this was a fight that would test every ounce of her strength. The physical battle would be one thing, but the emotional battle was something entirely different. Zaren watched his daughter closely, trying to read the subtle signs in her behavior. He had learned to do this over the years, watching her body language, her gaze, understanding her without words. He had known her better than anyone, and yet, now, he was watching a version of her that seemed so unfamiliar. She was quieter than usual, her movements slower, more deliberate. She had always been strong, both physically and mentally, But now she was confined to a bed, her body weak and her mind struggling to keep up with the changes. Zarin could see the tension in her eyes, the resistance she fought against. She didn't want to be dependent on anyone, least of all a human medic. But it was not just Dr. Carter's hands that held the key to her recovery. Zarin understood that it was Lyra herself who had to make the decision to heal, to fight for her own freedom. She would need to trust again, not just Dr. Carter, but the process itself. Trust had always been something foreign to her, a concept she had never fully embraced. Her pride had always been her armor, her strength the weapon she wielded against the world. Now, she had to break through that armor, not just for herself, but for the future that lay ahead. The morning after Dr. Carter had told them that the next phase of her recovery would begin, Zarin stood beside his daughter's bed, watching her sleep. She looked peaceful, but he could still see the lines of tension in her face, the quiet struggle of a mind that refused to give in. He sat down beside her, his presence calm and steady. For a long moment, they both sat in silence, the only sound the quiet hum of the medical equipment. "Lyra," he said softly, his voice breaking the stillness. "I know you don't want this. I know it's hard to accept, but you're not alone in this. I'm here. Dr. Carter is here. And we will help you, step by step." Her eyes fluttered open slowly, her gaze locking onto him. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, a vulnerability that Zarin had not seen in years. She didn't speak, but the message was clear. She didn't want help. She didn't want to be a burden. She had always been the one giving, the one leading. But now, her strength had been stripped away, and she was left with only the option to accept the help that had been offered to her. "I'm not weak," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I never was." Zarin reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I never said you were," he said quietly, his grip firm but tender. "But sometimes, even the strongest need help." Lyra didn't respond immediately, but her fingers tightened around his, a small but significant gesture. She was still here. She hadn't given up. And Zarin knew that with each passing day, she would get closer to the woman she had once been. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But it would happen. Because Lyra was a fighter, and no matter how broken she felt, she would rise again. Chapter 3, The Rebirth. Weeks passed, and Lyra's recovery progressed, albeit slowly. The initial days after the surgery had been difficult, but Dr. Carter's skill and determination had kept her stable. The first few attempts to move her legs had been met with resistance, her muscles weak and atrophied from the long months of inactivity. It was frustrating, disheartening, and at times, Lyra wanted to give up. But every time she thought she might, she would look into the eyes of her father, see the quiet pride in his gaze, and know that she couldn't stop now. The battle had just begun. Dr. Carter's methods were unorthodox, to say the least. He used a combination of advanced human technology and techniques that had never been attempted on an alien species before. Lyra's body responded in ways that surprised both of them. Her spinal cord, once thought to be beyond repair, began to show signs of life. The first time she moved her toes, the sensation had been so subtle that neither Zarin nor Dr. Carter had been sure if it was real. But when it happened again, and then again, they knew that Lyra was fighting back. Despite the progress, Lyra was still haunted by the fear that she would never walk again. She would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her body shaking with the weight of that fear. But every time, Dr. Carter was there, his steady hands and reassuring voice helping her push through. Zarin, too, remained by her side, a silent pillar of strength, offering her the one thing she needed most, unwavering support. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling physical therapy session, Lyra found herself exhausted, her body aching in ways she had never imagined. She had just finished working with Dr. Carter, who had adjusted her treatment plan based on her most recent progress, when Zarin approached her. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the frustration, and the remnants of her former pride. "How are you feeling?" Zarin asked softly, sitting down beside her. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She stared out the window, the stars outside twinkling in the distance, reminding her of everything she had lost. For a moment, there was silence between them, and then she spoke, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "I feel like I'm a different person, a person I don't know. I don't know how to be this version of myself." Zarin nodded, understanding her struggle. He had watched her evolve from a confident, strong leader into someone who had been forced to rely on others. But what he also saw was the fighter in her, the woman who refused to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. "You are not defined by what has happened to you, Lyra," Zarin said, his voice steady. "You are not the sum of your injuries, your scars, or your past. You are my daughter, and you are the strength that will carry us both through this. You are already more than what you think you are." Lyra met his gaze, her golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe the truth in his words. She was not broken. She was not a failure. She was a warrior, a queen, and she would rise again. As the days bled into weeks, Lyra's recovery began to show more significant progress. The first time she was able to sit up without assistance, it felt like a victory. She had not realized just how much of her strength had been tied to her body's ability to move, to act, to reclaim that independence, to once again feel like she was the master of her own fate, even in such a small way, was an achievement she hadn't dared to hope for. Dr. Carter was always there, his presence a constant reminder that, while the road ahead was long and full of obstacles, it was a road that could be traveled. One evening, as Zarin watched over his daughter from the doorway of her room, he couldn't help but feel a swelling sense of pride. She wasn't the same girl he had found in the bed, broken and silent. No, Lyra was fighting back, every day, every moment. She was reclaiming her life. And while the journey ahead would be long and filled with challenges, Zarin knew that she would emerge stronger, not just in body but in spirit. But there were moments, too, when the weight of it all became too much. Lyra would sit on the edge of her bed, staring out at the stars, lost in thought. In these moments, the stillness of space seemed to remind her of her own stillness, the parts of her that she had once thought were invincible but now felt fragile. She would struggle with frustration, with the reality that this would not be an easy road, that there were no guarantees. Yet, even in these dark moments, there was something else beneath the surface, an unshakable will, the fire that had once burned so brightly within her, and, perhaps, it was burning even brighter now. One evening, after an especially grueling physical therapy session, when Lyra had once again been reminded of how far she still had to go, she lay back on her bed, exhausted. Zarin entered, as he always did, checking on her, watching her closely. He could see the battle behind her eyes, the fight she was waging not just against her own body, but against herself. The old Lyra, the leader, the queen of warriors, had always been able to command respect, to inspire loyalty. Now, though, she was forced to command her own body to move, to rise, to take back what had been taken from her. "I don't know if I can do it, Father," she whispered one night, her voice raw from the effort of the day. "I don't know if I can fight this battle. I don't know if I'm strong enough anymore." Zarin sat down beside her, his hand gently resting on her arm. He had seen this kind of despair in the eyes of his people before. He had witnessed warriors, strong and proud, falter when faced with a challenge they could not overcome. But he also knew the strength that lay within them, the resilience that they carried in their bones, passed down through generations. Lyra was no different. "You are strong enough, Lyra," Zarin said softly, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "You've always been stronger than you've known. The strength of our people runs through your blood, through your veins. And though your body may be weakened now, your spirit is not." Lyra turned her head to meet his gaze, her golden eyes soft, yet full of determination. There was a flicker of something there, something deeper than the self-doubt that had been holding her back. It was a spark, and Zarin saw it for what it was: hope. The hope that she could rise again, that she could reclaim her life, even if it was not the life she had imagined for herself. And in that moment, Zarin knew that this battle, this fight for her freedom, for her life, was not just about the physical recovery. It was about her reclaiming herself, her identity, her purpose. "I'm not going to let this defeat me," Lyra said, her voice steadier now, the resolve returning to her words. "I will fight. I will not give up." Zarin smiled, the weight of a father's love and pride heavy in his chest. "That's my daughter. You are a warrior, Lyra. You were born to fight. And no matter what happens, you will always have me by your side." Chapter 4, A New Beginning. The months that followed were a testament to Lyra's resilience, her determination, and the slow, painful recovery that took everything she had. Dr. Carter continued to work with her, using his advanced techniques, his skill, and his patience to help her rebuild what had been lost. The process was grueling, but every small victory felt monumental. The first time Lyra stood on her own, even for just a few seconds, the exhilaration that flooded her was enough to make her want to cry. She had taken the first step, not just physically but emotionally. She had chosen to rise again. Zarin stood by her side through every step of her journey. He had seen his daughter face so many trials, so many obstacles, but this was different. This was a test of character, a test of willpower, and he had watched in awe as she proved, time and time again, that she was not someone to be defeated. The struggle was not just about walking again. It was about reclaiming the very essence of who she was. The pride that had once defined her as a warrior, the fire that had burned in her to lead and protect her people, it had not died. It had been buried beneath the weight of her injury, beneath the years of doubt and pain, but it was still there, burning just as brightly as ever. One day, after weeks of effort, Lyra stood before the window of their quarters, her legs trembling slightly beneath her, but her body upright, her posture proud. She looked out at the stars, those same stars that had once seemed so distant, so unreachable. Now, they were her future, her destiny once again in her hands. "I did it," she whispered to herself, almost as though she were speaking to the stars themselves. "I did it." Zarin entered the room silently, watching her with quiet pride. "You've always had it in you, Lyra. I never doubted you." Lyra turned to him then, a smile breaking through the seriousness that had defined her for so long. The smile was small, but it held all the strength she had regained. "Thank you, Father. I wouldn't have made it without you." Zarin stepped forward and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "You made it because you chose to fight. You chose to rise again, to reclaim everything you thought you had lost. And that is the true victory." Lyra's smile grew wider, her heart swelling with a new sense of purpose. She had done it. She had reclaimed her life, her strength, and her future. She had done it with the help of those who believed in her, and with the love of her father, who had never given up on her, even when the world seemed to have. And now, as she stood there, her body still trembling from the effort, Lyra realized that this was not the end. This was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. A life that was no longer defined by her injury or by the past, but by the choices she had made and the strength she had found within herself. "Father," she said, her voice filled with a new sense of certainty. "I'm ready. Ready to lead again. Ready to fight." Zarin smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "And I'll be right here, by your side. Always." Together, they stood in silence, staring out at the stars, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The galaxy was vast, filled with unknowns, but Lyra and Zarin had already faced the greatest challenge of all, the fight for her future and for her freedom. And so, their story continued, a new beginning forged from the ashes of pain and loss. Lyra, the warrior queen of Marva, would rise once more, this time, not as a captive, but as a leader reborn. And with her father by her side, she would take her place among the stars, ready to reclaim her destiny.